Hi, guys. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
No.
Hey, Andy.
I'm looking forward to this episode recording with you guys because I think this is going to be a slightly different episode for us. You guys are at the beginning, I think, of your HMO journey, and a lot of our guests that come on the show, they're a bit further down the line on this journey. But the challenges are different, and the obstacles and the hurdles and everything about it is different. And I thought it would be great to get you on and get your perspective on how the business looks at the minute and the challenges, how you actually, managed to make that kind of leap from the 9 to 5 into what you're doing now. I found out a little bit more about yourselves, and we're also going to do a bit of a Q&A today. A bit of a mini mentoring session, if you like. I know that you guys have got some questions that you want to ask me, so I'll do my best to answer them for you. But before we get there, it'd be great if we could find out a little bit more about you guys and your business. So, Alex, you're based, and investing in the south coast of England. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what your interests in property currently look like and what you're doing at the minute as a business?
Yeah, sure. So Properties was founded a little over a year ago, but we really only started getting really into HMOs this year. And we are going for HMOs in Bournemouth specifically. It's an Article 4 area. We're doing 3-gen HMOs for professionals, and we've gone to the very high end of the HMO market. And so far, it's been really good. We've got one project that's about 7 weeks away from being fully completed, and we've got another 2 that we've lined up, bought them, plans are in, and we're waiting to get started on those as well.
All right, so it's all go full steam ahead. And am I right in thinking that you started doing this about a year ago? So you sort of almost finishing the first project now, and you've got 2 more on the go, about to start. And that's all within the first year.
Yes.
Interesting. And tell us a little bit more, Sam, about Before Property. You and Alex obviously work together. You kind of share a lot of, in your roles. But actually, and I want to talk to you about this today, your roles within your property business are a little bit different. You've defined them. But tell us a little bit about how you guys met and how you came to the decision to actually invest in property. There's so much stuff going on out there. There's so many courses that you could go on. There's so many people doing things and doing it in different ways. How did you actually cut through that and make the decision to invest in property?
So I guess to start us off, Alex and I met about 7 years ago, which is in our corporate lives. We've worked together ever since, kind of side by side in the same roles. We then kind of got together in personal lives about 5 years ago now. And for the last 3 years, I would say, we've both been kind of exploring property. We were very guilty of being those people that went to lots of training, and we'd done lots of research and education. And it just got to a point where we had to just bite the bullet. We had buy-to-let properties that were making us around 3% ROI per year. It just wasn't making sense. And then at the start of this year, we made that decision of BRR HMOs as a strategy for us after learning about all different things: service accommodation, rent-to-rent, BRR HMOs, supported housing. And that was truly the one for us. And we've just really tripled down on it over the last 10 months.
And how did you make the decision to actually get started with HMOs and do that in Bournemouth? It's not a cheap part of the country, and there must have been a process that you guys went through to actually make that decision. I know, Alex, that part of your role in your business, based on our pre-chat, I understand is, you kind of handle the appraisals and the numbers bit. So perhaps this is a question best answered by you.
Yeah, I think where we are, we're just outside London. And when we were doing the kind of where do we go, where are we going to focus in terms of areas, if you draw anywhere around London, that's pretty difficult, right? Because it's super high prices in terms of property prices, and the yields just weren't really there. And then we had a choice to make. We had a choice of, do we go towards kind of middle and the north of the UK, or do we go down south? And we were lucky enough to speak to lots of different people, get lots of different perspectives. And the south coast, from a capital appreciation perspective, was better. And it also meant that when we started looking into it a bit more, we had that debate of Article 4, friend or foe. And we realized that actually there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot more red tape, and there's a lot more things to get your head around, but actually there's a lot of opportunity there. So that's where we managed to focus in on that South Coast area.
Fantastic. And this must have all been part of a bigger plan, I assume. This certainly, you haven't stumbled across this first HMO. And I get the impression that you guys have probably been thinking a bit further beyond just the first or second and third property. Can you talk to me a bit about that 5-year plan, Sam? What does that look like for you guys, and how did you design that?
Yeah, so I guess one of the first podcasts we listened of yours of actually was around reverse engineering your numbers. How do you get to where you need to be by counting kind of the HMOs that you need and things like that? So we kind of sat down and went, right, our ultimate goal in 5 years is to be able to replace our corporate salaries through property, to give us that flexibility and option. we love our jobs and, we wouldn't change kind of our corporate lives as well, but we want the flexibility. And for us, that's where the 5-year plan come into play. We worked out that we need 10 BRR HMOs in the South Coast to kind of get us to where we want to be from a cash flow perspective. And from there, I just got super aggressive with the numbers.
So it sounds like you reversed engineered this, which I think is absolutely the way to do it. And any other way, I think you really risk drifting off course. It's quite easy, I think, just to get started with something because it's easy or it's there or you heard someone in the pub talking about it. But actually, that deal or that location or that strategy might not be quite right for us. It's different for all of us, isn't it? What we actually want to ultimately achieve and what we need and how we are going to get there is different for all of us. And it sounds like you guys went through that process, which is always good to hear and much less risk of you being 1 or 2 degrees off and then getting to your, end of your 5-year plan and finding it actually you're 1,000 miles out from the, maybe the financial objectives or even that freedom and time and choice and the flexibility that you really want, which is the simple stuff in life. And I absolutely get it. Well, talk to us about this first project, your experience of doing the first deal then, Alex. Has it been a baptism of fire or was it as you expected? Was it more challenging than you thought?
I think we've been really lucky that we're working with experienced people that are experienced with HMOs. The difference between the projects going relatively well and it potentially being a disaster. So that's been great. And when I say people, I mean, there is so many people. You don't realize how many people are actually involved in what is a very intricate process of doing a BRR HMO, whether it's brokers or whether it's architects or whether it's the actual builders themselves, everyone in between. So far, it's been really good. We've learned a lot and we're taking a lot of those lessons in our second and our third HMO project in that area. So I think the number one thing has been communication and getting good people.
No.
And they would listen to one of your podcasts and you mentioned about kissing a few frogs, a little bit of that, but we've actually been very lucky because we've taken the time to speak to as many people as possible and get recommendations from people that have been doing it and have the experience. And that has saved us an enormous amount of time and energy and money and mistakes as we've gone through the last couple of months.
I think that's a great piece of advice to share and really good to hear. It's really difficult sometimes when you're planning a new business or planning a new project. And again, the easy choices are just to, pick the first builder that you come across or go with the cheapest price. And actually going through a proper tendering process, spending time to actually meet people, get them on site, just build a bit of a rapport with them. Do they email you back when they say they're going to? Have they included the detail that you need to understand? Have you got the references? Have you been and seen them and met them on their sites? Is it all adding up? And it does take time and there's a real commitment to it. And I think it's really important that people, our listeners and new investors really do understand how much of a commitment there is to actually just getting these parts, and these ducks in a row. The risk is you get something wrong and the whole thing, comes down like a deck of cards. You kind of have the wrong builder and then you miss out on your timelines and then you have an issue with the mortgage and so on and so forth. And actually, they can be really expensive problems from a time and just pure financial cost perspective. So it's really great that you guys have been through this process.
I suppose it hasn't been all plain sailing. More the projects have actually been okay. It was getting to the project itself. That was the tough bit because when you're new, you're an unknown entity to everyone involved. And you have to build that credibility and you have to have that consistency to, an estate agent is a perfect example and we're in sales and we know what it's like. If they're qualifying as a buyer and you have to consistently deliver and show up. And the same, what you said in terms of the builder of them saying that if they're going to email, it's the same on the other side. You need to do what you're going to say you're going to do. And you need to do that consistently to build that because otherwise you're always going to be at the bottom of that list. They've always got people that have got existing relationships and you need to get part of that club. And that takes a lot of time. We probably spent our first 4 or 5 months just grafting at that and not getting a lot of progress for it until we really actually found the right properties and started building out the right contacts.
Yeah, I think you speak some real truths. And actually, we were finding that a lot of our community members were struggling with this piece, Alex. And actually, that's one of the reasons why we started to build some of the services inside the roadmap out, because we could see that people were struggling to know who to turn to for their architecture services or the right broker who really understood the lenders and the specific types of products and the way that properties can be valued commercially. And actually, without a feasibility from an architect and without understanding what maybe the term finance looks like on a deal, and perhaps without having a good planning consultant and lots of other stuff, it can be really difficult to pin down what your investment actually looks like. And yes, there can be a cost to it. And yes, there's absolutely a time that needs to be put to it. But we really did recognize how much of a challenge this was, just getting into the deals, let alone being in the deals and managing projects themselves. So it's really great to actually hear that you guys took this on board and really prioritized this exercise. I suppose now that you've kind of got that first one under your belt and you've nearly finished, are there any lessons that you've learned from the first project that you will take into the next projects?
Yeah,
I think my absolute biggest lesson has been, no matter how perfectly you plan and time everything, property does not stick to your timelines or your plans. I had a very neat timeline that planned out, right, builders go in on this date and they'll finish on this date and then we'll refi on this one. And sometimes you just have to show a bit of flexibility and kind of go with the flow.
I think that is, even now 20 years on, the most accurate sort of representation of doing small developments and development projects that we could give anyone. And actually, I think it really highlights the importance of planning for that to happen. And, plan for the worst, hope for the best. And having contingencies in place, especially if you're working with private investors or you're on a bridge and you need to get off and there's going to be a certain cost to it. And actually, what does that mean if you accumulate more interest? And unfortunately, I think even with the best planning in the world and, the best builders, and there are surprises. There's things behind the walls. There are global pandemics. There are budgets by people like Liz Truss that can all kind of come in and just kind of pull the rug from under your feet. And I think the fact that you guys, coming out of your first project and you're already talking about this sort of stuff and you're aware of it is brilliant. It would be really concerning if the whole project had gone swimmingly and there was nothing that you could have sort of come out of the woodwork that made you kind of maybe change the way that you had planned to do things next.
It's all about problem solving. That's the big thing. There have been things that come up and you just have to angle it and go, okay, right, that's happened. That's going to take an extra 10 days to fix and we're going to have to get some to come out. That they're normally twice as expensive because we need a certificate for something. You have to go with it, and then you have to figure out, okay, how do we make that time back, or how do we kind of trim that cost or use that contingency, as you said.
That problem solving element, Alex, is one of the things that I've really enjoyed about building businesses, and especially in property. The number of challenges that land on my desk and problems that need solving on a daily basis, some of them quite, significant with pretty huge implications. And while it's really frustrating and you kind of wish it wouldn't happen, in a way, it is one of the reasons why I love building businesses and doing this. I like the fact that I'm constantly kept on my toes, and I like the fact that it isn't predictable, despite how much work and how much control we want to try and have to make it predictable. It never is predictable. I quite like that. I think in a sadistic way almost.
Yeah, and when the stakes are this high, property is a high stakes game. You can make good money, but you can also lose a lot of money. And when the stakes are that costly, I think it give you an edge as a team. I think we've got really kind of sharp in those skills, and it means that you've got more skin in the game, so you just put more energy into it. And as individuals, I think we've learned a ton, but as a team, I think we've done pretty amazing things over the last 10 months.
I mean, you are the numbers man, so if you lose me a ton of money, I won't be happy.
Yeah, the thing will be pointed well and truly at you, Alex, in that case. But before we get on to some questions that I know you want to ask me, just help me understand then, sort of very high level. So we've got the first HMO that's coming up for refinance. That is how many bedrooms?
That is an 8-bed, all ensuite, luxury high-end HMO.
Very nice. And what is your anticipated cash returns, like bottom line income, when all is said and done on that project? You've refinanced, you're repaying the mortgage, you've got your bills, overheads and stuff like that. What should the performance on that property be every month?
So we're looking to net about 2.8k. Now, obviously there's voids and things like that, but if fully tenanted, 2.8k, and we're a ROIC of somewhere in the region of about 30%.
Okay. And that's on a self-managed basis, I assume?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. And the next two projects that are already on the books, but you're just getting things in line, where are they and what will they look like? Are they similar types of projects?
Yeah, they're kind of, if you draw a circle, they're probably within 5 minutes of each other.
Great. I mean, that is music to my ears, absolutely. And is the objective the same with them, all ensuite HMOs?
Yeah, the two that we bought are actually pretty much cookie cutter. They're a little bit different. So they're semi-detached Victorian houses. They're detached Victorian houses. One's going to be a 7-bed. We could have squeezed 8 in there, but we wanted it to be premium. We've got rooms in there that are 18 square meters. So it's a really nice scheme. And then the other one is an 8-bed as well. So they're all sui gen HMOs, 5 minutes with each other in an A4 area.
Okay, I mean, you're definitely saying all the right stuff, and these are obviously, from a sort of cash flow performance-wise, these are really good properties. The 8 beds, there's a few challenges to 8 beds that I've talked about on the show before, but definitely if you can pull them off, the relationship between the sort of the asset value and the cash flow, it generally just does increase significantly over 5 rooms. So really great to hear this. And how have you bought this? Just help me understand, as a business, where is the capital coming from to buy these HMOs? How are you getting out the deals, and how are you making it possible to do the next deal?
So in terms of our first project, it's fully funded by ourselves. As I mentioned, we kind of worked in technology sales for a long time, so we've really kind of grown our funds so that we truly have skin in the game. And then the next two, it's a combination between investor funding. We've raised just over 430,000 in investor funding this year, and also bridging on one of our projects.
Wow. So I think this is an important point to pause on just for a second, because this will be really interesting to our listeners. So you guys, you've done the first project and the next two on the books, but you've already raised over £400,000 in private investor funds. And the skill to do that, and I suppose the confidence to do that, that came from the exercise before even doing the first deal, all the work, the research, that's where it all came from.
Yeah, I think once you know the numbers, once you've seen it, there's a lot of people doing high-end HMOs at the moment, and it's a proven model. Then we've got our corporate backgrounds. Our jobs are to understand businesses and understand the intricacies of those businesses, and how do you improve them, and how do you ultimately help people make money. That's what we do for a living. So when we converted that into our business, we were thinking, okay, well, how are we going to do the same? And we went through a similar analysis, and investor finance is going to be a critical part to us scaling and us growing out those 10 HMOs that we want to get to in 5 years. And we can help investors make a lot of money in doing that as well. So it was kind of a win-win and a no-brainer. And when you have those conversations and you break it down to people, we've been lucky in terms of circumstantially investors that we've been speaking to who happen to just have quite a lot of cash there. We've also been talking to people who we never thought would have any money, and we're still talking to them about what we do, and they ended up that they did. So yeah, I would say my biggest advice is talking as much as possible about what you're doing, and you never know where that's going to come from.
I've got to say, guys, I'm seriously impressed. And this isn't meant to sound patronizing in any way, but with as little experience as you have, but to have such a good insight into the model, and obviously such good control over your strategy, and to have executed on it as well as this at this stage, that's really, really impressive. You should be really proud of yourselves. A lot of people, it takes them a long, long time to get to the point where they realize that actually finance is kind of the key to unlocking the growth. And it takes a lot of mistakes to realize that actually, it's a bit like decorating. All of the preparation, that's the important stuff. The easy bit is slapping the paint on the wall. The difficult bit is all of that preparation. So, you guys are absolutely saying the right things. Well, look, I know you've got some questions that you want to ask me. So now that I've got a good and thorough understanding, I think, of your business, shall we fire away with some of your questions?
Yeah, let's do it. So I guess one of the things that I would love to get your opinion on is, as Alex and I have kind of talked through, we've got super aggressive growth plans, but we're super conscious of also being over leveraged. I guess, in your opinion, what does healthy and sustainable growth look like?
That's a great question. And I think you've got to remember that the answer to this is going to be different for everybody. So, and it's dependent on your current situation, circumstances. It's really dependent on your risk profile. So I'll give you my opinion, and I'll kind of explain how I break it up and manage that. But you have to interpret that in a way that's right for you. And that's the same for all of our listeners today listening in. So with my HMOs, I think when it comes to HMOs, fundamentally, the primary objective should always be cash flow. Fundamentally, I think they are still the best performing real estate class when it boils down to good old sort of cash flow. But there is definitely a compromise. The further away you kind of, try and kind of push the deal in the direction of capital uplift and to be able to recycle cash out, I think the more you risk compromising that. So a good example is within the Article 4 directions, it can be quite challenging to find those deals that allow you to add lots of value and recycle money out. But they're the deals that will typically have incredibly high rental confidence, where you probably get the best rents, where you probably long-term get the best capital appreciation. So There's two risks here. One of the risks here is that you buy loads of those deals, or you start buying those deals, but you ultimately run out of options because it just sucks up all your cash. You cannot get cash out of the deals fast enough. That's a big risk to you in your business. So while actually you might not be over leveraged on the deals, and you've probably got very good and safe deals, actually your business and the plan is at risk because you haven't been aggressive enough. On the other side, if you kind of tip that on its head, if you push too hard into sort of trying to get cash out of deals, you end up maybe investing in areas where there isn't a huge demand or where there isn't a huge precedent set. And actually, the weather changes, the valuer gets out of bed on the wrong side, and he comes in, actually, he doesn't give you the valuation that you want. And all of a sudden, you've got a problem because you've got less predictability in your model. Within the Alta directions, you've got more predictability. Equally, you might get over the first hurdle with, let's say, a professional let outside of an Article 4 direction on the fringes. You might make a good sort of amount of capital uplift, but if some way down the line, let's say 2 or 3 years later, the wind changes direction and they fall out of favor, or banks don't want to put as much value on them because perhaps you're not getting the occupancy that you expected, that's a real problem. And actually, what do you do in that event? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. You need to probably carry enough risk and enough leverage to keep the music going, but not so much that if the music stops, you're the one sort of holding the ball. I think as an absolute minimum, you always want to have a contingency in the worst case events. So if there was a black swan event, what would you actually do? Could you tolerate that? Are you confident if, for example, you had kind of an issue with values in the future, would it matter too much if you still had the confidence of paying the mortgage, getting the rental income and paying it? You'd probably find that a bit more tolerable. So I think you've got to take a few things into careful balance. What I personally wouldn't do and wouldn't recommend, no matter how aggressive your plans are, is to buy lots of stuff, get it all leveraged on a commercial valuation, and do it all in the same way. So lots of, for example, 8 beds, all in the same location, all with the same bank, all on commercial valuations. That, for me, there's too many eggs in that one basket. I'd want to see a bit of diversification in there. So while what I'm saying is some deals can be more leveraged than others, and some deals might have a bit more of a focus on cash flow or capital uplift, short or long term, than others, the real way to de-risk what you're doing is to actually balance everything out overall. In a perfect world, and if you ask me what the perfect deal was in terms of balance, I would say that's one where there is a healthy net and gross yield, there's a healthy return on capital employed, and there's a healthy cash flow. So at least £200 net cash flow per month per room, but ideally more like 250. That's on a managed basis. If you were getting that and your return on capital employed was between 12 and 15%, and your net yield was somewhere in the region of about 6%, that for me is a very healthy deal if off the spreadsheet is in a good location. But not every deal is going to be like that. And it would be unrealistic to actually plan to do every deal like that. So I think you've got to stay open-minded. I think you've got to have your wits about you. You've got to be prepared to take a bit more risk here and a bit less there over the sort of the journey that you guys are going on. And what you'll find is that gradually what happens is your risk reduces naturally because you're diversified. And if you're not too aggressive about refinancing as well, you can let, hopefully with time, some capital build up in your assets, which just reduces your risk profile. You've got a little bit more cushion if something happens. So I know that's a long-winded way to answer your question, but I think the truth is because it's not a simple answer. And I said I was going to give you a couple of examples from my own. So let me do that. My HMOs now are super vanilla. Student HMOs in an Article 4 direction, all in a similar location. They have different types, 4s, 5s, 6s, and so on. They are very, very easy to run. They give me a lot of rental confidence because of the university nearby. But they don't really do me particularly well from a capital creation point of view. So while they're low risk and very safe, actually, I can't just do that and continue to hit my long-term number, my big growth plan. So actually, I've got to take a lot more risk somewhere else. And that's what I do with my bigger commercial to residential projects. They are significantly bigger. They require a lot more from a capital perspective. They potentially reward much greater amounts, but the risk is much, much higher. As much as possible, I try and separate those risks. There's always, the potential that if everything imploded, things are personally guaranteed and got to be mindful of that. But that is how I sort of separate it. And I don't try and get too much of anything from one deal. those deals, those commercial to resi projects, the assets at the end that we try and keep, they're not the best from a cash flow perspective. Actually, they're pretty poor versus the HMOs, but they do really well on a capital perspective. So my strategy, I think, is a good example, but fairly extreme example of that diversification process. So plenty of food for thought for you guys. And I think if you're fixing some of your mortgages for 5 years, I think you could certainly afford to do a bit more of what you're doing for the next 5 years. But I think you want to be getting those capital values. You'd be allowing them to increase over time, but also reduce your loan to values over time, and then gradually doing different types of projects as well. But at the same time, keeping your business really streamlined so that you're not having to juggle lots of different things. A long-winded answer, but hopefully that has answered your question.
Yeah, really helpful. I think from our side of things, we wanted the next 5 years is about growth and cash flow. And I think that's something which we're aiming or sprinting with Sam in terms of getting to that 5-year mark. But I think you're right. And we've heard you talk about diversification a lot on this podcast. And we know that we want to be in a position where if something does go wrong, if there's a market change, if there's a new bill that gets introduced, actually we haven't got all of our eggs in one basket. And something that we hadn't really considered only in the last couple of weeks or months was we were thinking, great, we'll just mortgage it up to the hilt on a commercial valuation. We'll take the highest LTV ratios, we put it on interest only and happy days. It was only when we were speaking to other people around actually what happens if, and what happens in that 5-year mark, or if you fix for maybe the second time it's okay, but what happens when your next fixed term comes up? And that got us thinking in a slightly different way in terms of over the medium term, we certainly want to be knocking down those LTV ratios.
I think long term, and I mean, this is just my goal, yours might be different, but I think long term, you really do want to be getting that kind of, you want to be letting inflation sort of erode your debt away. And, for me, I think getting down to the sort of cross the board, 50 to 60% loan to value, over a 10-year period, I think that's a great position to be in. Incredibly safe, not completely bomb-proof, but as close to it, I think, as you can get as possible. And actually, if you're doing deals that allow you to exit and you've got solutions to maybe pay any residual debt back, if you're leaving a bit of capital on the table, whatever it might be, over time, I think you can be creative and you can find solutions. Maybe every now and then you sell a property and you just chip away at some residual debt. There's different ways to do it, but I think long term, that's probably where you want to end up. And at the end of the day, you might choose to go again at some point between now and then, but it gives you the choice. And I think it gives you that cushion. It gives you almost that insulation if there is a big shock. But there's no doubt, at the early stages of business, you are going to have to stick your necks out a little bit just to get to a point where you can afford the luxury to actually say, you know what, we're going to let some of the mortgages drift and we're not going to refinance them aggressively.
I think we worked out that at that 5-year mark, that it becomes a snowball effect. And that's where you actually, money we living on average is about 100 grand a property. So once you're getting the room rates and once you're getting the rental income that we're receiving and the ROICs that we're getting, it doesn't actually take that many to start making it a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's when it allows you to get choice, as you mentioned.
I mean, it's like speaking to myself, Alex, but you're absolutely right. I describe it to my mentees as a bit of a tipping point. There is a point in your portfolio, in this projection, where your portfolio every year will be making enough to almost be aggregated and allocated to the capital you're leaving on the table in each deal. So let's say that is, you gave the example of 100,000. So you get a few projects up and running. If every year they're making 100,000 and you can afford to keep that in the business and not draw it out personally, that's then paying for the next one and that comes on board. And then next year you're hitting that target even earlier. Before you know it, you're doubling it. And actually the problem is, how do I spend my money quickly enough? How do I make money quickly enough? Which is, that's essentially the compounding effect. But there is a J curve to it. And at the minute you guys are in that aggressive phase, you're going to be sinking your resources in it, time and money and energy, and it will feel for a while like you're not getting much back from it because you're still having to leave the money in the business to do the next one and pay for all your professional fees and things like that. But it will pick up and you will find that growth trajectory and the income will come, and that will make the next one easier and easier and easier.
We're definitely there. we're definitely in the J at the minute.
Yeah, we're doing all this work and we just want to see some of the joys from it, but obviously you've got to invest before it grows.
It's a long game.
You do. And I think you just got to have the temperament of a good investor to know that actually That's normal. That's fine. You can't do all this work and have a plan like this and then take the money out and spend it all at once and live, a nice, flashy lifestyle. There is a balance to everything. But a great first question. Shall we move on to your next question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let you ask the second one.
Yeah, I think we spoke about it a bit in terms of investors, and that is so important to us as a business. At the moment, we've raised a pretty reasonable sum of money in terms of fixed rate returns. We're always having the healthy debate between the two of us of when is the right time to do JVs, and what does that look like? What are the pros? What are the cons? Logistically, what do we need to think about that it means it's going to be right for us, and at what time?
Well, based on what you guys have told us today, I can't see why you would do JVs. If you can raise debt finance and you can do the projects like the ones you're doing, and you can find a way to continue growing, and you're prepared to make some sacrifices along the way, keep the money in your business as long as you can, I don't know why you would do a JV. And let me tell you why. So first of all, as soon as you bring a partner in, you've got another sort of decision maker in the business, whether you like it or not. What that means is that long term, and when you go back to your original objectives, if that is choice and freedom and flexibility, an element of that is ultimately compromised because somebody else will, rightly so, have their own sort of plans and want to make their own decisions, and their circumstances might change, and it may not be the plans that you both agreed to, but if your own plans change, you would want to be able to do whatever you wanted with your business and property. And I think you've got to be careful, because actually you can end up building, a portfolio that might create you some wealth on paper, but actually just doesn't give you the flexibility that you ultimately want, doesn't really deliver your goals and aspirations. I think the other thing about a joint venture is that it still takes the same 9 or 12 months to do a project, but you're giving 50% of the equity away. When actually, if you can just take it on a debt basis and you can factor that debt in and still make the deal work, then why would you give half of it away? I think the best joint ventures work when there's a really clear separation as to what each party is bringing. So someone is the delivery partner and someone is the finance partner. Someone is bringing the tradesmanship, someone's got the skills on site, and someone's bringing all the investment and the deals. But it sounds to me like you guys don't necessarily need either of them. You've got the attitude, you certainly, motivated to do this. You've obviously got the skill and experience to actually do it. You can raise the finance. I can only see that, the skills that you maybe don't have yourselves are the ones on the site, but I'm not sure that's the best joint venture. You can just pay a good builder to deliver a good product. So it might not be the answer that you were looking for, but I mean, the short answer for me is don't do a JV. Keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing it. It sounds like you're doing a really, really good job of it.
I think that's a perfect answer. We're quite happy with that.
Heads down, do more, and keep it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely happy with that route. I think it was just for us, is JVs a way that we can scale quicker, but actually if we stay on track with our 5-year plan, we should be good.
I think we're going at a pretty good pace.
Yeah, and you can scale quicker with joint ventures, but you've got to ask yourself, is that sort of scale and what you ultimately end up with as a result of that scale, is that what you want? Might be more properties on paper, but you might only own the same amount of equity as you would do if you'd have done them yourselves. Now you've got other people making decisions. I think if you were going to do something quite different, like if, for example, when you think about diversification, you might want to move on to do bigger projects or different types of projects. That's different. If you were to partner with people who had maybe skills in an area that or a field that you didn't, that is different. But I think to do what you're already doing, you don't need to. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Brilliant.
Okay, great. Another good question. Next.
So I guess lastly is the infamous question, to self-manage or not. And I guess it's a debate we have regularly, I would say.
Remind me, when you set out to do this and when you sat down and thought about your goals and targets, there was obviously a figure, there was a number to it, but on a personal level, what were the things that you wanted to get from building a portfolio?
Yes, time,
and
flexibility,
yeah.
And I guess we've gone back and forth with this management piece, and we've kind of said, the first couple of years, is it something you take on, one from a learning perspective, but also to allow you to kind of bring in more cash flow. Then once your portfolio gets to a certain point where you could actually say, do you know what, the cost of management, we could actually bring someone on board to do that for us. But then, yeah, it's just that ongoing debate, right?
I think I can probably help simplify this for you. I think the ultimate objective is time, freedom, choice, and flexibility. So actually managing tenants just doesn't, it doesn't fit with that, quite simply. So long term, I don't think there's any doubt you guys don't want to be doing it. You want somebody else to do it. So the question is, who is that person? Is it an agent that you outsource the work to? Is it a staff member, a team member? So there is a point at which it makes more sense to bring the services in-house. But what you need to remember is that it's more than just the kind of when you're making enough money to perhaps pay a staff member what you would pay an agent. And here's why. If you hire somebody, let's say you're paying that person the same as you're paying an agent to manage your portfolio, that person that you hire still gets sick, they still need to go on holiday, and they still might be rubbish at the job. And in any of those circumstances, what do? You then need cover. And who ends up being that cover? Inevitably, it's you. So actually, for me, and it really depends on how important the time and freedom and choice and the flexibility is, but if it's an absolute priority, like if it's the number one thing, then for me, you wouldn't bring it in-house unless actually you could afford to have coverage across the role. So you could have more than one person doing it. So you need a portfolio of a certain size. Before that, you would just give it to an agent. Now, at the stage you guys are at, early stages where it's growth, you want to reinvest and keep as much money as you can, there is a strong argument to say, do it yourself. Suck it up, roll your sleeves up, do the management. Yes, you'll learn a lot. I'm not actually sure that that's that useful, especially as you want to give it away. But I think most importantly, what it does is it gives you all the control. It allows you to produce and control a good product to your customers, your tenants, so that they stay longer, they pay more for their rent, they refer people, you have stickier households. That ultimately all translates into income. And the more income you're generating, the more that you can stay in your business, the faster that you can grow. But there will definitely become a point where you guys recognize that where you're spending time managing the portfolio, you're not spending it in growing the business. At that point, or even before that point, you need to see that and you need to say, we've got to make the change. And there is a step back at that point. You've got to pay for the service to get you more and more, or keep you more and more in the business so that you can focus on those income generating exercises. That is one of the really tough bits. And that is why most people never get beyond being a landlord and become proper property business owners. You guys need to make sure that that is ultimately where you stay. So you can do a few things that just help you to get to that point, but you've got to be prepared to make the tough decisions when you get to that point and say, actually, no, we've got to step back now, give it to someone else, pay for it so that we can get our heads down and keep focusing on buying more deals, doing more deals, raising more money and all of that stuff. And you might say, actually, we feel like we're there already. And if you are, you've got to be honest with yourself and give the management away to somebody. But only you guys can answer that.
I think that's great. That's really helpful.
Does that help? Does that give you some sort of clarity, I suppose, on, I mean, you're self-managing at the minute. How much time do you think it does take up? You know, you've got the first property and it's not a huge amount at the minute, plus some other vanilla buy-to-lets.
Do you know what? Vanilla buy-to-lets, I actually think are more time consuming. But one thing I didn't think about was actually, I had this long-term plan of we would bring someone on board and they would manage it. But actually, I didn't think about if they're off sick or they're out for a holiday, that ultimately falls back on us again. And that's not the future we want in 5 years' time. So a really great thing for us to think about.
I think that you'll inevitably get to a point where you'll supersede your cash flow goals, because I suspect that most of the 5-year priority is a cash flow goal to get you out of your current jobs. You know, is that part of the plan?
I think it's certainly for a period of time, it may be just, it's matching. But certainly it's given us the choice. But
Yeah.
we actually love what we do. It's just, we may not love it for another 40 or 50 years.
So when you're thinking longer term and you supersede some of your short-term cash flow objectives from your portfolio, capital growth, wealth creation, wealth preservation, a security, you know, I've talked about my figure, 40 million on the podcast before, and having the ability just to crystallize it all, putting it into something dead easy, low return, dead safe is an option that I want. But that is why a lot of my focus is on capital creation and not actually cash flow generation anymore. If I was to focus purely on cash flow by trying to keep hold of management costs or by only exclusively doing deals that prioritize cash flow, I'm not going to get to my longer term objective, which is the wealth creation and wealth preservation. There's some levels to the game. And I think once you get over the first level, you'll see the next level and the next level, and your objectives, they'll change, and your plan will probably evolve a little bit. And I suspect that the idea of management will become less and less appealing as actually you see that you're going to make a lot more money than you're going to save by doing other things.
I think, next time we get to level 1 or just about to level 1, maybe we need to come back and have a conversation about level 2 and what that looks like with you.
Absolutely. And I have no doubts whatsoever that you guys are going to be there in no time at all. You're saying all the right stuff. You're doing all the right stuff. You're asking all the right questions. This all sounds really, really exciting, which is probably a nice time for us to wrap up, guys. It's been really enjoyable having you on the podcast today and having a slightly different conversation. I hope it's been helpful. I hope you've been able to sort of get some value from that and take it back and inject it in your business. For anyone listening today that's been inspired, wants to follow you, maybe even wants to get in touch, maybe even wants to invest, where best can they find you?
So best place to find us is Instagram, Sam_Alex_property.
Fantastic. And what can we expect next? These 2 deals that are on the books, coming to fruition, underway, being turned into pretty incredible HMOs?
Yeah, so plan is end of this year. So end of 2024, we'll have project 1 up and running. And then the next 2 projects by end of H1 next year should be up and running.
Brilliant. Guys, thanks once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Yeah,
Thanks, Andy, great to meet you.